Well, the background to this talk is that I'd heard various people saying that some of the stories of the Old Testament are myth, and it didn't really happen. And it's very difficult to prove or disprove that comment, isn't it? And I thought, well, is there anything we can have any evidence at all of the Old Testament could actually be fact? We believe it's fact, but can I try and convince someone else it is so by looking at any evidence at all? And one of the areas, of course, we can look at is archaeological evidence. Now, there's a few caveats that go with this talk, because we're talking about artefacts which are some 2,500, 3,000 years old. So we can never be 100% certain. I can't stand here and say, we're going to show you tonight definitely what I say it could be. I just don't know. We aren't there. We weren't there. We can't confirm it. The other issue you've got is because loads of evidence would have been destroyed over the years. It's a long time ago, so we're going to find limited amounts of evidence. And it's going to be quite sporadic and perhaps not as complete as we would like it or want it to be if it was our choice. So we're just looking at this timeline here between Abraham to the time the Israelites were on the border of the promised land. So we're trying to cover a period of that. So have we got any evidence in the scripture or any evidence in the archaeological finds that can actually indicate that the events, the peoples, what occurred actually happened or could have happened? Because that's the point, isn't it? We can't prove it, but could it have happened? Well, the first thing I wanted to show you was this here. And it's a tablet, and they're called the Elba tablets. And this was found in the area of Haran, in northern Damascus, sort of south of Syria, that area of the world. And just read it, it's very interesting there. It's a couple of points come out of this. This is the person who found it all up there. And it says the roots of the Jewish culture lie in great and advanced civilizations like that of Elba. Unfortunately, they are located in modern Syria, Iraq and Iran, where unprejudiced evaluation of the findings of those engaged in the work is impossible due to publicity and that pronounce. The great philosophist Epiphanes and semestist Professor Giovanni Petronito, to his bitter regret, found this unhappy fact to be true. The Syrians, incensed by the influences, cracked down on the scientists of the mission, and the Director General of the Syrian Department of Antiquities and Museums demanded a formal declaration from Petronito outlining his position on the relationship of the inscriptions to both Syrian and biblical history. Petronito dutifully submitted to an official declaration in which he penitently wrote, the documents that I have had to honour to decipher and study always give us more evidence of a central role of Syria in the history of the third millenary. We are not authorised to make the inhabitants of Ebla procedures of Israel. Now, it may be a minor point, but remember, a lot of the evidence we're going to think about in this timeline was not found in Israel. We know Abraham came originally from Ur the Chaldeans, around the Fertile Crescent, and went to a place called Haran in Syria nowadays, before coming down into the land of Israel. And what this scientist had found, and investigator found, he had found these tablets in the area of Haran today, or Haran in those days, and it mentions Abraham on the tablets. Now, at first hand, that wouldn't be surprising, in a sense, because remember, Abraham of our Bible had 400 men under him. He was a big player in the region. It wouldn't be surprising he had tablets with his name on it. He was almost a king in the area at that time. He was not an individual in a certain area who didn't have much with him at all. This man was a man of wealth, a man of riches, a man of power at the time. So it's not a surprise we're going to find tablets, but find the tablets in Syria where he was investigating at the time and searching, he gets straight into problems with the Arab nations. They do not want to have Israel's history, as written in the scriptures, confirmed in any way at all. They want it wiped off. They don't want to have that history there. So hence you have a problem straight away where the Arabs will try to undermine investigations and search. And we're going to see that throughout this talk, that we have a problem with various things that have been found where the Arab nations are involved and don't want to have it proved that the Bible was actually correct. And the Israelites do have a right to the land in some form or another. So yes, we have this tablet here. It shows the name Abraham on it, and it clearly comes from the area. I can't tell you it's the Abraham of the Bible, but is it just a happy coincidence? You know, I don't know. I don't know. But let's move on then. So we've seen one example here of a name which we know and is found in very ancient tablets in that area where we'd expect to find Abraham appearing or Abraham appearing. We know later on that the Israelites end up in Egypt under the time of Jacob. They moved down to Egypt. And this area here I've marked up on the map there is Avaris, is modern day Avaris, it's called there. But in those days it was the area where the Israelites were located when they moved down into Egypt. So it's well known that this is the area of Gershon where they were there. They were in that area. And there's this place called Avaris, and it's off limits to the public. If you were going there now, you couldn't go there. Excavations there have been done extensively by scientists who are allowed, and at certain times of the year for certain periods of time, and very short periods of time. And they've found various things in this place which become quite interesting. But the Egyptians don't like anyone really searching that place because it might uncover things they don't want uncovered. And so they demand that the searches are for very limited periods of time. And once the search is completed, all the stuff they've done is covered up by soil again. So they dig it all up, they search it all out, and then it's all okay, and they then farm it on top of it after that. So basically, they try to just remove it from the site. They just take it away. Now, they classify covering it with soil again as protecting the sites. The reality is they're just they're not doing that at all. But you would never allow farming above these sites to form some form of protection to the sites. That's what's happened in this particular area. And it's become an interesting area for those who have managed to get into it and actually search things out because they have found things of interest. They found tablets. And the tablets have got the name Jacob on them. Once again, not surprising, a descendant of Abraham, brought a number of people down to that area. We know the name Jacob, and that's got that name in it. It probably is a unique name, we know that, it's quite a common name. But whether it was at that time, we don't know. And these tablets have been found with the name Jacob on it. They've been found in Avaris, that area. They've been found in Israel itself, and they've been found in other places as well. But it's once again, it's evidence that there was a person, but appeared to be called Jacob, living in an area of a timeline we'd expect, and in an area we'd expect them to be. Jacob would have been there. So it's just coincidence. It just happens to be there, and it happens to be in the right place. And they found 9 seals with that in that format, with the name on it. Now, in the same area, which is more interesting, they dug out and they found an enclosed area, and it was quite an interesting area. This was. They began to uncover it because it stood out from everything else they had found in the area, and the reason it stood out was when they began to dig down, they began to realise these houses that were in the area were not typical Egyptian houses. This was not a typical Egyptian build. And in fact, the build in this particular complex they're looking at related to the kind of builds they're finding in Syria. And that kind of area. It wasn't a kind of build they were finding or had found already in Egypt. So immediately they put the conclusion, wait a second, so we've got people here who've come from Syria, north of Egypt, now living, and very specifically they built a different type of house, but around them, all Egyptian houses, and this one area, this complex, is in a different format. It's in a format of what you'd expect to find in Syria. So they started looking into it, and what was interesting about this is when it was excavated properly, the house was discovered to be a palace, or some form of palace, a major design, some form of palace affair. And this palace was in a design totally different to what they experienced anywhere else. It was not an Egyptian palace, it was someone else's palace. And the palace had 12 pillars. As I say, completely different design from what I find around. But more interestingly, in the garden, there are 12 graves. And what's fascinating about that is 11 of the tombs are in a small format and very simple format, but one of them is exceptionally big and exceptionally different. Now, when you start putting two and two together, you think, well, actually, this aligns pretty well with what we might expect to have been Joseph's house and the brothers who perhaps had graves and were put into that accommodation or left there. But Joseph, of course, was the prince, basically, almost, wasn't he, in Egypt? And therefore he would have had a special house, a special grave when he was laid there. And within the bigger grave, they found the tomb, and it had a big statue in there. And the statue, once again, they went into the statue's head. This is not an Egyptian statue. It is totally different. It was 12 feet high, and it had the chap had a Syrian sort of bowl haircut, as they used to have, totally different to what the Egyptians had. He had red hair, according to what I discovered on it, pale skin, all non-Egyptian, and unique. Nothing like it's found anywhere else in Egypt. And it's strange, isn't it? They suddenly find these things and they immediately start putting two and two together. This is Joseph. This is a depiction of Joseph. You know, we can't be sure of that, and I can't prove that to you now. But it could be Joseph's house. It could be the tombs of his brothers. All we can say is the finding is unique in Egypt. But we know from scriptures that what we found there and what we discovered there correlates to what we would expect perhaps to find if we were there looking at the time when Joseph lived. So let's continue on. So the Apira papyrus was found in a similar area of Egypt. This is an interesting thing. It was written by I think they were magicians or the wise men of the time. And they used to write these various papyrus, and they wrote on them. And this is one that was deciphered when it was discovered, and it was quite interesting, really. And what I've done here is on the left-hand side is what the writing there is, and I put the scriptural comments on the other side. So on the writings on this plaque, there is, "Plague is throughout the land, blood is everywhere, the river is blood, men shrink from tasting human beings, and thirst after water." Well, we know one of the plagues in Egypt brought by God, because of the way the Egyptians treated the Jewish people. We know it was, as we write here on a corresponding comment I put there, "And the waters of the river were turned to blood. There was blood throughout all the land. The Egyptians dug round the river for water to drink." And the plaque goes on, it says, "Forsooth, gates, columns and walls are consumed by fire. Forsooth, grain is perished on every side. Well enough of a plague was fire mingled with hell, very grievous. Flax and the barley was smitten. There remained no green things. And then the land was without light, and then we know it's 3 days and nights of darkness." And I found the final one's really quite interesting. It says, "Gold and lapis lazuli, silver and malachite, carnelian and bronze are fastened on the neck of female slaves." And we know what happened in the scriptures, don't we? And they requested from the Egyptians gold and silver and gold, articles of clothing, thus drained Egypt of its wealth. So it would appear to a reasonable person looking at that what you've got here is the Egyptian commentary on the plagues, which we read in the Bible. So it's fascinating, isn't it? When you start looking into this thing, you begin to think, oh yeah, there's actually quite a lot of correlation going on here. It's not unreasonable that some of the evidence that's been found does actually relate to the Bible, providing us support that what the stories, the accounts, as per the Bible, are absolutely correct. They are right. Now, I don't know about you, but I remember these maps many years ago now, and these are maps I used to grew up with, and they told you the journey of the Israelites through the wilderness. But there was a big problem with those maps, which we didn't know, I didn't know when I was young at the time, but there's virtually no evidence of that track, that journey. If you've got 2 million people, which is the expected amount of people going through a wilderness, you'd expect them to leave some kind of stuff behind them in some way, pottery, whatever else might be, identify the journey they made through the wilderness. And they've more recently, they began to look at it more closely, because there's a big problem with that map and where Mount Sinai is. And what's gone on there is how that whole structure could well be wrong. And what they're suggesting now is actually a journey was something like this. And the actual crossing of the Red Sea was actually in the Gulf of Aqaba, rather than at the top there. They went straight out, went straight to the Gulf of Aqaba, and that's the area where they actually crossed over. So it's totally different to what I was certainly brought up with. And the evidence that goes with that, there's quite a lot of it. It's circumstantial, I'll get it right in a minute. Wrong word. That's it. My wife's got it right. She knows what I was trying to say. But yes, so basically there's evidence that goes with it. And they're going to show you, let me show you some of the evidence that goes with that journey. The first thing to notice, what does Pharaoh actually say when they're leaving? For Pharaoh will say of the people of Israel, they are wandering in the land, the wilderness has shut them in. So they've gone off now, and Pharaoh's looking at the situation, so the wilderness has shut them in. They're blocked. He seems to think they're blocked in some way. There's no way out. They are trapped. Now, the thing is, that journey takes them through a valley. And it's an interesting valley. You can go, this is what we've taken more recently, these pictures have been. And there's a valley which they lead down, and it leads down to a beachhead at the end of it. And they're going through, so this is at the end of that journey. If we go back, let's just try and work this back. No, we won't. We won't go backwards. We just keep going forward. It's much easier. So basically, they're at the end of that journey, as they're coming towards the sea, the Gulf of Aqaba, that is what they see. And they're going down a long valley, and it's quite a long valley going down. And basically, you can't get out either side. You've got high walls on both sides, and there's no way out. You're going down the valley. And as the Bible says, Pharaoh thinks they're trapped. They've got nowhere to go. And at the end of it, well, Josephus says here, for there was on each side a ridge of mountains that terminated at the sea, which were impassable by reason of their roughness and obstructed their flight. So Josephus is commenting later on, a Roman historian, on exactly the situation that the Jewish people were in. And at the end of that valley, you can see the valley coming down. They end up, and this is the beachhead here. And it's actually quite a massive beachhead. It's something like 5 miles long and 3 miles wide. It had enough room to take 2 million people onto it, all packed in there, but they had nowhere to go. You couldn't get out of there at all. If you're in there, you're in trouble, basically. If your only exit route is one exit route, and that's through the valley you've just come down. And that's where the place is called today. It's called New Weba, and that's where people now will tell you, they believe that's where Israel ended up, on this shoreline here, totally trapped, and there was no road out. However, if apparently across the water there, actually there is a low level of water that actually could be a pathway going across it. It's between two areas. I think if the information is, it's very deep here, and it's very deep here, but actually there's a much higher area going across there. And some would assume that that is where they went across to the other side. And that's the journey they made when they crossed the sea. It says here, and in the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and the cloud looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian force into a panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and upon their horsemen. But the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, of the water being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. So we know that the Israelites or Jews was allowed to walk through, but the Egyptians were destroyed with all their chariots and such like. Now, recent searches in the area find a very interesting designs or shapes in the sea once they go into the sea and start investigating it. And they've done various checks on this, and apparently there's high levels of metal in these particular corals that have now formed there. And corals take many hundreds of years to form, but the bizarre shapes they form look like they're axles and wheels. And they're not elsewhere. That's the funny thing about it. There only is one area of the sea. You'd expect them, if they were just randomly, to be found anywhere. They're not. They're just found in this one particular area. Now, given the length of time, of course, water have had its effect, but the Egyptians we know did use metal. Wood and metal were primarily how their chariot wheels were made, and the metal seems to be high levels of metal in these particular structures. And there's quite a lot of them. I mean, you've got a lot of them like that. They're very unusual shapes. They're just not what you would expect. Something's down, something's been there. And moving on, so we find now, we now have got there's a beach, and it's about, I think it's about 50 miles north of the area where the crossing is believed to have occurred today. That's what people tell you. And there's two pillars. And the person who found these pillars, it's quite interesting really, because they found the pillar there on the left. They found that was found in Egypt, and it was found just in the sea. And someone looked into it and they thought, this is a bit strange. What's this pillar doing here? Why is it just rolling around the sea? Why isn't anyone doing it? So they spoke to Egyptians, and they could see some faint inscriptions on it, and they took it out and they lifted it up, and the Egyptians happily went to put it up on their site. It's really got nothing on it. You can't really read much. But it just happened to be a pillar on the other side as well, in Saudi Arabia. And the chap who found the pillar in Egypt went across to Saudi Arabia and found the pillar, and he began to make notes of what was on the pillar. And the pillar had comments like, it was Hebrew writing. There were Solomon's pillars. Solomon put them there, 2 pillars, one each side. And it had comments about Moses, had comments about Pharaoh, had comments about death and water. And it's believed those pillars were put there by Solomon to mark the point of which the Jewish nation, Israelites, came across into Sinai. So that's what they believed happened. Now you think, well, where's the pillar gone on the other side? Well, the Saudi Arabians didn't like that pillar. They took it down, it disappeared. No one knows where it's gone. Because people are going to use that pillar now to say, this is what happened. This is a true history of what happened with Israel. They did cross here. This is what happened. And it vanished. And no one knows what happened to it. It was taken down by the authorities. So you just got the little stump. And that's all you got now, which is left. And you can see the active participation of the Arabs in not wanting this information to come out, because it proves something they don't want to be proved. It proves Israel's history, as written in the Bible, is actually correct, and they're desperate that not to happen. And it continues on. Saudi Arabia particularly are not exactly very helpful in the situation of trying to prove anything about the Israelites. If they did cross here, which is what I marked on the map just up there, which is a planned crossing place, well, there's areas after that which are really quite interesting. And I've marked the areas there on the map. We'll see in a second the actual photographs, the satellite photographs and other pictures. But basically, you've got the wells and the 70 palm trees. I put the palm tree. You've got the split rock, and you've got where it's called Jebel Musa, which is Moses Mountain by the actual Arabs who live there. The Bedouin actually live there, so that's Moses Mountain. And there's something special about the mountain, which I'll show you in a minute. And you say, well, we used to always believe, of course, or I was brought up to believe, that Sinai was where in Egypt, on the Sinai side. And that's what I always accept as being correct, and perhaps with little or no evidence, but there's much more evidence actually it was here. This is in Midian. Midian never was on the other side, and we know that's where Moses lived, and we're told that's where they came to, Midian, not Egypt, not in Sinai, as where we would believe it was today, as people tell you. And so we have these 2 accounts I want to put here is, behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and the water shall come out of it, and the people did drink, and Moses did so in the sight of all the elders. He opened the rock and waters gushed out. It flowed through a desert like a river. Well, that's the rock I was showing you there earlier on, very close to this area looking at. That's the rock they believe. And the Bedouins say that's the rock that Moses struck. Now, you know, how true it is and what's going on there, I don't know, but the Bedouin do believe that's what Moses struck. And they've got no particular akin to Saudi Arabia or anyone else. They just happen to have lived in the area for donkey's years and just tell you that's the rock Moses struck. But is it just coincidence? I don't know, but it could be the right rock. It could be. It's not beyond the realms of fancy. It is the right rock. You know, it's there. And it says, then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped by the waters. Well, just down from there, as I pointed out on the map, there's this place here, which is believed to be today the place of Elim. There happens to be loads of palm trees, and there's 12 wells. Definitely 12 wells, but there's obviously palm tree numbers change. So I don't think exactly the correct number of palm trees, but it's just, is it just coincidence? It all happens to be in around that same area, and it fits largely with the account of what's being provided in the scriptures. Then it's when we're told about the Jewish journey as they travel through, or his right journey from Egypt, they set out from Rephidim and came into the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in the wilderness. There Israel encamped before the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. Now we know that they came to this particular place. That we're told in the Bible, and we know there's 2 million people, and they're going to stay there for some little while because the scripture tells us to wait there, by the law was given and everything that occurred there, by the building of the ark occurred. They stayed there for quite a long period of time. So you had 2 million people living in one area for a long period of time. So is there any evidence that's the right area? We can actually find in artifacts that are actually found in the area. So that is the mountain, Mount Musa it's called, as I said earlier on, or Jabal Musa, Mount of Moses. And the interesting thing is it's got a black top to that mountain. Now, you might think to yourself, well, that's just a different rock on the top. So, but it's not. If you're going to scrape that rock, it's actually the same colour as the one underneath once you scraped it away. So it appears that rock has been affected by some form of burning. So it really is that dark, it really is that black. You can go up there and touch it, and there are people going up there with on YouTube, I think you can find them, going up there and getting these rocks and breaking them open, realising exactly the same colour. So clearly, this mountain has some kind of fire on it, caused that blackness to occur. And it's quite deep into the rock as well. Now, we were told the fire came down from God. Is that what results of that fire? I don't know. But is it just coincidence? I don't know. It just seems a strange coincidence, doesn't it? Matches what we might expect to see. I'm not an expert in geology. I understand how rocks are affected by fire and what kind of erosion would have occurred. But is it just a coincidence that this, on the top of this mountain, happens to be blackened with rock? I don't know. This is the area below. This is a suspected area where the Israelites would have camped out for this period of time. And it is a massive area. It could easily accommodate all those people. Now, if you go to the old Mount Sinai, where people used to go to and were told this is where, in Egypt, where the Egyptians, there's no real space there. My father, who usually doubts anything I tell him, he happily told me, he said, well, I went there, and he said, I'd been to there, and he said, and I looked at it, and he said, I went up Mount Sinai with the Egyptians, and we had a sunset or a sunrise up there. And so I looked at it and said, there's no way you can get 2 million people here. So I looked at it and said, this can't be the right place. So it just doesn't fit with what scriptures are telling us. Well, this place does. So the place in Sinai in Egypt does not. This place does. It's got loads of space there. And for where they could have camped out those people. So that's the view you get from the top of the mountain looking down. And these are all the artifacts they found, all in the sand and the ground, and there's hundreds of thousands of artifacts there. In the middle of nowhere, no one lives in this place now. As far as anyone knows, no one's ever lived in here permanently, and yet there's artifacts everywhere in the ground. So clearly at some stage in the past, a transient people stayed in this place for a period of time and left behind them loads of things. at some stage in the past. And these dates the times of the Israelites coming out of Egypt. This kind of the pottery and the kind of stuff like that relates to that period of time. And what do we know happened at this place? Well, it says that Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. He rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and 12 pillars, according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And Aaron received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And he said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. So there's two things that have occurred here. There's an altar which Moses built to worship the Lord, and there was an idol which was built by Aaron, a calf idol. Well, the interesting thing is, there happens to be at the bottom of that area 12 unhewn pillars, those white ones there. There's 12 of them, happens to be sitting there. And there's a form, that design there is believed to be some form of altar at the time. That's exactly at the bottom of this mountain. So it would appear this could be well linked with what we just read there. And when it goes to the issue of calves, well, the fascinating thing is, on some of the rocks nearby, there's pictures of calves on the rocks, of cows. These aren't known in this area at all. They don't live there. Someone has brought that information, written and done it on there in that period of time. So there's never been cows and calves wandering around that area. This is Egyptian, coming from Egypt. Someone's come there and drawn these things on there. But remember, this place has only been on the grid, as it were, in the last 30 odd years. People weren't allowed there. Saudi Arabia are very strict on that, and they even restrict it now. They cut off lots of it. You might want to go into the place. They keep it very restricted to any kind of access at all. So people aren't doing just wandering around. You just can't go and just visit the place and get free access to it. It's very restricted. They don't want people to go into the place. That's what, if you listen to the archaeologists, that's the problem we've got here. It's very difficult to actually get there unless you go in secret and before the soldiers find you. Then it says, "Then Moses said to the people of Israel, 'See, the Lord has called by name Beelzebul, the son of Uri, filled him with the Spirit of God, with skill, with intelligence, with knowledge, and with all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold and silver and bronze, in cutting stone for setting, and in carving wood for work in every skilled craft.'" So this is when they're now coming in the same area to build the tabernacle and build all the part of the tabernacle, which is where they're going to worship God. Now, we know if you want to do this kind of work, you're going to need some kind of facilities to melt, to furnaces and things like that. Well, they just happen to have found furnaces in the area as well. They found 3 of these on top of one of the hills just there. And they're apparently intense furnaces which would be subject to incredible heat on the inside of them. And there's 3 of them in a row. Someone's clearly done something there in the past, but there's no other habitation in the area. So why would someone come all the way there to this place with no other houses in the area to build furnaces, to burn something they don't even know what it was, or make something in these furnaces, when no one actually lived there? There's no evidence of any housing at all, prehistorically. So something clearly happened in this area where people came in and did something and disappeared again. And there's these, in many of the rocks around as well, there's always kind of deliberate shapes being cut into the rocks. Like these are the templates of various designs that are made at the time. So there's lots of them there. And apparently, if you've got a vivid imagination, you could probably see the Ark of the Covenant and the angels are there as well. There's various designs they can find in the rock as well, but I say that's it. But I mean, that's a bit, that's probably going a little bit too far. But, the shapes look like they could be. But clearly, there are lots of this kind of work in the ground where they've used the rock as the template of making something has been made there, some kind of design. So, just in summary then, as I said, we can't prove anything, but what it does show us is the evidence of the Bible, as written in the Scripture, those first few books of the Bible, could well be true. I believe it is true, irrespective of the evidence provided there. But from the evidence we're actually finding, it could be true. It's been proved to be true, almost, by what we're reading. So Abraham's tablets were found in the area of North Syria, Haran. Jacob's signet found Averroes and in Israel. Syrian architecture found in the Goshen area, indicating a high official of Assyrian descent in Egypt. Papyrus describing possible plagues. Potential sea crossings, place found. Potential site of Mount Sinai found. So I believe these things provide additional evidence to the fact that scriptures are true. Thank you.